Okay, folks, our next topic is internal and external challenges to the state power 1450 to 1750. And basically, most of what we're going to cover, most of these people on the bottom during this time. To some extent or another, we may not get to all of them. Freemanpedia, as you can see on here, is a great resource to get a little bit more info if you need to. All right, so we're going to start with the Fronde Rebellion. This is a series of rebellions in France in 1648 to 1653 during the early reign of Louis XIV, who really tries to establish himself as an absolute monarch. And he's confronted by opposition from princes, who are family members, nobility, the law courts, and most of the people. And a lot of it's in response to taxation policies that he puts in place to both fund wars, but also to build the Palace of Versailles that you see in the picture. There's a big pushback from the people. They question the authority of the king. They sought to limit his powers. They are really pretty, for the most part, unsuccessful, because France will remain an absolute monarchy until 1789. Okay, Queen Nzinga, modern day Angola, okay, which is on the west coast of Africa, very kind of west central Africa. She fought for freedom and stature against the Portuguese. She allies with the Dutch, who are more coming in from the other side, from the eastern side, to help her out. She fights a series of battles and wars against the Portuguese. She wins in 1644 and again in 1647, but then things don't, she's not able to continue it, so they implement guerrilla tactics. One of the things they do is create a haven for runaway slaves, and they can, but the wars can continue until 1657, when there's finally kind of a truce, and Queen Nzinga begins to develop the rest of her colony. It's a pretty interesting case. Russia. There's a series of rebellions in Russia known as the Cossack Revolts. Among those is also known as the Pugachev Revolt, which you saw on the first page. They take place from the 1760s on through the 1770s, 1775, not 1735 is when they kind of peter out. And a lot of it comes from the fact that Ivan the Terrible established serfdom in Russia as a way of consolidating his power and controlling his subjects, and eventually this leads to kind of an agricultural push from the north, and the reestablishment of the Russian monarchy as a powerful thing, and they begin to move into territories, and one of those territories they move into is the Kazakh territory. Also, Kazakhs are also known as, it's often spelled Cossack. Same people. The Kazakhs are nomadic herders in southern Russia. They still exist today, though not as really a herding people, at least not to any great extent. The rebellion grows from the degradation of the grazing land, the taking of the grazing lands by the Russian government, but also kind of a degradation of the serfs and their continued oppression, and from peasant anger, people who aren't serfs getting angry because things are, the Russians are kind of to Russify this area, which is pushing in Russian people into this territory. The revolts promised the serfs land and promised them freedom, and they're going to expel the Russians, and it really doesn't happen that way, because Russia is a very repressive government with a big army. They end up repressing the Kazakhs even more, taking away more loss of rights. Persecution of Kazakhs will continue through the reign of Stalin in the mid-20th century, and there's even some issues still going on today, though Kazakhstan and those areas where the predominant of the Cossack people still live are now independent of Russia. Okay. Moving on to India, the Maratha Conflict. The Maratha Conflict takes place towards the end of the Mughal Empire as it begins to collapse during the reign of Aurangzeb, who, as I've discussed in some other things, he kind of takes back the religious tolerance of the early Mughal rulers, and so that leads to a rebellion against the policies of the Mughals. The Marathas are more southern and Hindu. The Mughals are northern Muslims. And as you can see on the map, eventually by 1758, the Maratha will become the main player, and the Mughal Empire is really weakened to a big extent. Gradually, the British and East India Company will move into that territory. And what happens is that these rebellions so weaken the Indians in general, they cannot resist the outside threat, and namely the British East India Company, as you see in that light blue in the far right of the map. Eventually, as we've seen on some of the other maps I've shown you, and as we'll see in period 5 and 6, the British East India Company takes a lot more territory. Okay, Pueblo Revolt. This is in the American Southwest, and it is the largest and most successful Native American uprising in North American history. It points out problems with Spanish-style colonization and demonstrates the power that Native Americans could wield and could have wielded if they were able to join together to fight the invasion of Europeans into their territory. But it eventually will peter out also for a variety of reasons. Okay, finally I'm going to leave you with the Glorious Revolution, and this is this is in England, 1788. This is when William and Mary Stuart, William is the king of Holland. They're married. They overthrow James Stuart II. James is Mary's brother, and they overthrow him. He is an absolutist and also a Catholic, and they overthrow him with the encouragement of the British Parliament to get rid of absolute government under the ideas that they will come in as constitutional leaders, and they will also agree to keep Britain Protestant. This ends absolutist rule in England, limits the power of the monarchy for good, and permanently establishes Parliament as the ruling power in England. Okay, so those are your revolutions for the time period. We will come back and hit revolution much more in Unit 5.